The morning sun cast long shadows across New Haven's agricultural domes when the emergency alert began blaring through every speaker in the colony. Park Jinwoo was reviewing crop yields in his office when the sound made his coffee cup shake against the metal desk. He had been colony administrator for 8 years, but he had never heard that particular alarm before. Kim Mingi burst through his office door without knocking, her engineer's uniform still dirty from the morning maintenance shift. "Jinwoo, you need to see this, now." They ran together through the corridors of the main habitat building, past confused families gathering in doorways, and children pressing their faces against windows. The command center was already crowded when they arrived. Lee Hyun stood at the main communication console, his face pale as he adjusted the controls with shaking hands. "It's from Earth's command," he said without looking up. "Priority Alpha transmission." The large display screen flickered to life, showing the tired face of Admiral Morrison. Behind him, Jinwoo could see people running back and forth, alarms flashing. Red in what looked like a war room, the Admiral's uniform was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "All colonial settlements. This is Earth Command with Emergency Directive 77 Alpha." The Admiral's voice was steady, but Jinwoo could hear something underneath it. Fear. "As of 0800 hours, all Federation military assets are being pulled back to defend the core worlds. The hegemony has broken through our outer defense lines." Dr. Choi Suna arrived, just as the transmission continued. She still wore her medical scrubs from the morning surgery, and her hands were clean but her face showed worry. Around them, more colony staff filled the room, everyone drawn by the sound of the alarms. "Colonial settlements beyond the inner sphere are now outside our operational capacity to defend." Admiral Morrison continued. "We are sending what supplies and equipment we can spare, but after that, you will be on your own until we can stabilize the situation." The room fell silent, except for the quiet hum of the life support systems. 50,000 people lived on New Haven. They grew food, raised families, built homes under the light of an alien sun. They had always known Earth was far away, but Earth had always been there when they needed help. Through the command center's main window, they could see the spaceport where the Federation destroyer, UFS Guardian, sat on the landing pad. The ship had arrived 3 days ago with routine supplies and mail from home. Now Jinwoo understood why Captain Rodriguez had looked so serious during their dinner meeting. Captain Rodriguez has been given authority to transfer what military supplies he can spare, the Admiral continued. After that, the Guardian will depart for the core worlds. I want you all to know that this decision was not made lightly. Earth does not abandon her children. We will return as soon as we are able. Kim Mingi grabbed Jinwoo's arm. "How long?" she whispered. "How long until they come back?" The transmission answered her question, though not in the way anyone wanted to hear. "Timeline for return of military. Protection is currently unknown. Maintain emergency protocols. Prepare for extended isolation. Earth Command out." The screen went dark, leaving them all staring at their own reflections in the black surface. Captain Rodriguez arrived at the command center 30 minutes later. He was a career military officer, the kind of man who had spent his whole life following orders without question. But today, his orders were breaking his heart. "We have plasma rifles, medical supplies, and emergency rations," he told the gathered colony leaders. "Enough weapons for maybe 200 fighters. Food for 6 months, if you're careful." Lee Hyun studied the inventory list. "What about heavy weapons? Ship defenses?" "The Guardian needs everything she has for the journey home," Rodriguez replied. "I'm sorry. I wish I could do more." Outside, word was spreading through the colony. Families gathered in the common areas, parents holding children who didn't understand why everyone looked so scared. The teachers at the colony school tried to maintain normal routines, but even the youngest children could sense that something had changed. Jinwoo walked with Captain Rodriguez to the spaceport as the crew loaded the last of the supplies. Boxers, of weapons and medical equipment sat on hovering platforms, waiting to be distributed throughout the colony. It looked like very little when spread out against the needs of 50,000 people. "We'll come back for you," Rodriguez said as they reached the ship. "Whatever happens, Earth remembers her people. We don't leave anyone behind." "I know," Jinwoo replied, though he wasn't sure he believed it anymore. That evening, the entire colony gathered in the central plaza to watch the Guardian depart. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, waving goodbye to the ship that represented their connection to Earth. The destroyer's engines created a pillar of blue fire as it lifted into the darkening sky, growing smaller and smaller until it was just another star among thousands. Kim Mingi stood beside Jinwoo as the crowd slowly dispersed. "So what do we do now?" Jinwoo looked up at the alien constellations above their heads, so different from the stars of Earth. Somewhere out there, an enemy was coming for them. But here, under these strange stars, 50,000 humans would have to find a way to survive. "We endure," he said quietly. "We survive, and we wait for them to keep their promise." 6 months after the Guardian disappeared into the void, the first alien ships arrived like dark omens against New Haven's dawn sky. Park Jinwoo was eating breakfast with his daughter when the proximity alarms began screaming. He dropped his spoon and ran to the nearest observation deck, joining dozens of other colonists who stared up in terrified silence. The hegemony scout ships were nothing like the human vessels they remembered. These were massive crystalline structures that seemed to bend light around their edges, making them difficult to look at directly. They moved without sound, positioning themselves in perfect geometric patterns around the planet, like pieces on a chessboard. "They're beautiful," whispered Han Yuna, a 7-year-old girl whose father worked in the mines. Her mother quickly pulled her away from the window. Li Hyan's voice crackled over the colony communication system. "All residents report to designated shelter areas immediately." This is not a drill. The aliens did not attack right away. For 3 days, they simply watched. Their ships hung in orbit like sleeping giants, while the colonists huddled in their homes, afraid to venture outside. Children asked their parents when the ships would go away. The parents had no answers. On the 4th day, the first drone appeared. Kim Minji was checking the water recycling systems when she saw it through the maintenance tunnel's small window. The device was about the size of a human torso, floating silently above the agricultural domes. Its surface was smooth and reflective, like liquid metal, and it moved with purpose rather than curiosity. "Contact," she whispered into her radio. "Unknown craft over Sector 7. The drone descended toward the wheat fields where farmer Cho Junho was working. Junho looked up at the approaching machine and did what any reasonable person would do. He ran. The drone followed him for exactly 30 seconds before a purple beam shot from its underside. Junho's screams lasted only a moment before he simply disappeared, leaving behind a small pile of ash and his empty work clothes. That was when the colonists realized the aliens were not here to communicate. Dr. Choi, Suna established medical stations in the deepest parts of the colony's underground sections. The first casualties arrived within hours of the initial drone attack. Burns from energy weapons, injuries from falling debris, and psychological trauma from seeing things no human should witness. "The energy signature is unlike anything we've seen," she reported to Jinwoo as she treated a woman whose arm had been partially disintegrated by alien fire. "Our medical equipment can help with the physical damage, but these weapons do something to human tissue at the molecular level." The attacks followed a pattern. Every few days, drones would descend from the orbiting ships and select targets seemingly at random. Sometimes they took soil samples. Sometimes they harvested plant matter. Sometimes they took people. There was no way to predict when or where they would strike. Families began sleeping in the underground tunnels that connected New Haven's various sections. What had once been maintenance corridors and storage areas became a hidden city where human children learned to live without sunlight, Young Han Dojin, now 11 years old, became expert at moving through the tunnel system without making noise that might attract the alien sensors. "It's like a game," he told his sister Yuna, as they crawled through a ventilation shaft to reach the food distribution center. "We're hiding from the monsters." But it was not a game, and the monsters were very real. Not Li Haiyan organized the colonies. Defense efforts with the weapons Captain Rodriguez had left behind. 200 plasma rifles against an enemy with technology centuries more advanced than their own. The first time they shot down a drone, the entire colony celebrated. The second time, 3 more drones appeared to collect the wreckage. After that, the colonists learned to hide their victories. "We're not fighting them," Haiyan explained to his volunteers during a training session in the deepest tunnel. "We can't fight them. We're just trying to survive long enough for Earth to remember us." Kim Minji worked 18-hour days, keeping the colony's essential systems running from underground control rooms, power, water, air, recycling, food production. Everything had to continue working while staying hidden from the alien sensors above. She rigged emergency shutoffs that could make entire sections of the colony appear abandoned if the aliens came looking. "How long can we keep this up?" asked her assistant, Jung Ninseo, as they rerouted power cables through an abandoned storage room. "As long as we have to," Minji replied, though privately she wondered the same thing. The months passed slowly in the tunnels. Babies were born in underground medical facilities, their first cries echoing through corridors lit by emergency lighting. Children attended school in repurposed storage rooms, learning mathematics and history, while energy beams occasionally flashed past the surface windows. Above. Dr. Choi Suna noticed the psychological changes first. Adults moved more quietly, spoke in whispers, even when safely underground. Children drew pictures of crystalline ships and purple death rays, instead of flowers and sunshine. Everyone jumped at sudden noises. "We're adapting," she wrote in her medical log. "Humans always adapt, but we're becoming something different down here. Something harder." By the end of the first year, New Haven existed in 2 worlds. Above ground, the alien drones continued their methodical harvesting and observation. Below ground, 50,000 humans lived like their ancient ancestors had lived in caves, waiting for a danger to pass that showed no signs of leaving. Park Jinwoo stood in the deepest tunnel and recorded a message that would never be sent. Day 365 of the siege. "We are still here, still human, still hoping that someone remembers we exist." Above them, the crystalline ships continued, their patient watch, waiting for something only they understood. 3 years of living like underground creatures had changed the people of New Haven in ways that went deeper than their pale skin and quiet voices. Park Jinwoo looked nothing like the confident administrator who had once managed a thriving colony. His hair had turned completely gray, and his hands shook slightly when he thought no one was looking. But his eyes still held the same determination that had kept 50,000 people alive when the rest of the galaxy had forgotten them. The alien ships had been patient. For 3 long years, they had studied, harvested, and experimented with the humans below. But patience, even alien patience, had its limits. The massive troop transports that now hung beside the crystalline scout ships were dark and angular, like giant insects preparing to feed. "They're done playing with us," Li Haiyan said as he studied the sensor readings in what had once been a storage closet but now served as their military command center. The walls were covered with hand-drawn maps of the tunnel system and patrol, schedules written on scraps of metal. "Landing craft have been launching for the past 6 hours. Ground forces are taking positions around every entrance to the underground sections." Kim Minji worked frantically at a jury-rigged control panel, her fingers flying over switches and dials that controlled the colony's fusion reactor. The reactor had been designed to power a peaceful settlement, but she had spent months modifying it for a very different purpose. "If I overload the containment system, the explosion will take out everything within 20 kilometers," she explained to the small group of leaders gathered around her, including us. Dr. Choi Suna moved through the medical stations one last time, checking on the wounded and saying goodbye to patients she had cared for during 3 years of siege. Many of the injuries were old now, energy burns and shrapnel wounds that had never quite healed properly with their limited supplies. "I've done what I can," she told each family. "Now we trust in something bigger than medicine." The alien ground forces were unlike anything the colonists had seen before. Through the few surface cameras that still worked, they watched insectoid warriors in powered armor advance through the ruins of what had once been New Haven's main plaza. The creatures moved with mechanical precision, their weapons glowing with the same purple energy that had haunted the colonists' nightmares for 3 years. Young Han Dojin, now 14 and taller than his sister, but still thin from years of rationed food, held his father's plasma rifle with steady hands. He had learned to shoot in the tunnels, practicing with precious energy cells, while other children his age should have been learning to drive hovercars or planning for college. "I'm not scared," he told Yuna, though they both knew it was a lie. "No," she replied, adjusting the emergency medical kit she carried. At 11, she had learned to treat plasma burns and set broken bones. Neither of them had seen natural sunlight in over 2 years. The final 8,000 survivors of New Haven gathered in the deepest part of the tunnel system, in a natural cavern that the first colonists had discovered but never developed. It was large enough to hold them all, and it had only 3 entrances that could be defended. The air was cold and damp, lit by portable lights that cast strange shadows on the rough stone walls. Families huddled together on blankets and sleeping bags, sharing what might be their last meals together. Children as young as 8 carried weapons, while elderly colonists, who had come to New Haven to retire in peace, prepared to die defending their grandchildren. Everyone understood that this was the end of the line. Park Jin-woo stood on a small rise in the center of the cavern, looking out at the faces of people who had trusted him to keep them safe. Miners and teachers, doctors and farmers, children who had been born under alien stars, and elderly couples who remembered Earth's blue skies. They had all become soldiers now, united by 3 years of shared survival. "The alien forces are moving into position," he announced, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "They will breach our defenses within the hour. We have fought them with everything we have. We have hidden, we have endured, and we have never given up hope that Earth would remember us." He paused, looking at the faces around him. Some were crying. Others showed the hard determination of people who had already accepted their fate. All of them were listening. "Today, we make our final stand. Not because we believe we can win, but because we are human. Because this is who we are. We do not surrender. We do not give up. We fight for our families, for our home, and for the hope that someday, someone will know that we were here." The first explosions echoed through the tunnels as alien forces breached the outer defensive positions. Lee Hayen and his volunteers took their positions at the 3 entrances, plasma rifles charged and ready. Kim Min-ji crouched beside her makeshift detonator, waiting for the signal that would end everything. Jin-woo activated the colony's emergency broadcast system one final time, sending his words out into the void on all frequencies. His voice was calm and steady, the voice of a man who had found peace with an impossible choice. "This is Colony Administrator Park Jin-woo of New Haven. We are humanity's children, 50 light years from home. For 3 years, we have stood against impossible odds. We have not surrendered. We will not surrender. Let this message stand as testament that we were here, we were human, and we fought to the very end." Outside the cavern, the sound of energy weapons grew closer. The first flash of light was so bright that it penetrated even the deepest parts of the cavern where the colonists waited for death. Han Dojin was crouched beside one of the defensive positions, his plasma rifle aimed at the tunnel entrance. when the entire cave system shook like an earthquake. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the portable lights flickered. "What was that?" whispered his sister Yuna, clutching her medical kit tighter. Before anyone could answer, another flash came, then another. The sound that followed was not the high-pitched whine of alien energy weapons, but something deeper and more familiar. Something that made Dr. Choi Suna's heart skip a beat, because she remembered that sound from her childhood on Earth. "Those are human weapons," she breathed. Lee Hyen pressed his ear to the communication device they had jury-rigged from salvaged parts. The speakers had been silent for 3 years, except for their own internal communications. But now, crackling through the static, came a voice that spoke in perfect, unaccented Standard Earth. "Colony New Haven, this is Admiral Kim Tae-yoon, of the Terran Defense Force. We are engaging hostile forces in your orbital space. Maintain your positions, and prepare for ground support." The cavern fell completely silent. 8,000 people stopped breathing at the same time. Children who had never heard voices from outside their underground world stared at the speakers with wide eyes. Adults who had given up hope 3 years ago felt something they had almost forgotten how to feel. Park Jin-woo grabbed the microphone with shaking hands. "This is Colony Administrator Park Jin-woo. We are under heavy assault by ground forces. Approximately 8,000 survivors remaining in the deep shelters." "Copy that, Administrator. We see your situation. Help is coming." Through the few surface cameras that still functioned, Kim Min-ji watched something impossible happening in the sky above. New Haven, the crystalline alien ships that had orbited their world like predators for 3 years, were exploding in brilliant flashes of light. But these were not the elegant, silent destructions she had grown used to watching. These explosions were violent and final, leaving nothing but expanding clouds of superheated gas. "The ships," she called out to the others. "The alien ships are being destroyed." On her makeshift display screen, she could see new contacts appearing on the sensors. Human ships, but not like any human ships the colonists remembered. These were not the sleek, white Federation vessels, with their curved hulls and peaceful designs. These were weapons of war, angular and brutal. Their dark gray hulls bristling with gun turrets and missile launchers. Admiral Kim Tae-yeon's voice filled the cavern again, but this time he was not speaking to the colonists. This time, his words were directed at the alien forces that had terrorized New Haven for 3 years. "Attention hegemony forces. You have exactly 30 seconds to begin evacuation procedures before we demonstrate what humanity has learned about warfare in the past 5 years. We strongly advise you to use that time wisely." The alien ground forces had no intention of retreating. Through the tunnel system, the colonists could hear the insectoid warriors continuing their advance, their heavy footsteps echoing off the stone walls. They had been patient for 3 years. They would not be denied their prize. Now, seconds later, the orbital bombardment began. The sound was unlike anything the colonists had ever experienced. It was not the sharp crack of energy weapons or the whistle of falling bombs. It was a deep, continuous roar that seemed to come from the planet itself, as if New Haven was screaming. The cavern shook so violently that people had to hold on to each other to remain standing. "Kinetic bombardment," Lee Hyen shouted over the noise, his military training finally useful again. "They're dropping telephone poles from orbit at 90% of light speed. Above ground, the alien forces simply ceased to exist. The insectoid warriors in their advanced armor, the hunter-killer drones, the command posts, and communication arrays. Everything the hegemony had built on New Haven's surface was erased in 17 minutes of precise, devastating fire from the human fleet. When the bombardment stopped, the silence was almost as shocking as the noise had been. For the first time in 3 years, New Haven's surface was completely free of alien presence. "Ground teams are inbound," Admiral Kim's voice announced. "Estimated touchdown in 4 minutes. Medical teams, engineering support, and enough firepower to make sure nothing like this ever happens to you again? Kim Minji started crying, her hands still resting on the fusion reactor detonator that she would no longer need to use. Dr. Choi Suna hugged the nearest person to her, who happened to be a 10-year-old boy she had delivered in the tunnels 2 years earlier. Lee Hyan set down his plasma rifle for the first time in months and just stared at the communication device as if it might disappear. Park Jinwoo's voice was barely a whisper when he spoke into the microphone. Admiral Kim, we thought Earth had forgotten us. Administrator Park, came the reply, and there was something in the Admiral's voice that sounded almost like anger. Earth never forgets her children. We just had to build the right tools to come get you. Through the tunnel entrance that had been defended by desperate colonists just minutes before, they could now hear a new sound. The heavy footsteps of armored boots, but these boots belonged to human soldiers. Marines in powered armor who had crossed 50 light years to answer a promise made 3 years earlier. Young Han Dojin looked at his sister and smiled for the first time since the siege began. Yuna, he said, I think we're going home. The first Marine to enter the cavern was a giant in powered armor that made him look more like a walking tank than a human being. His helmet was scarred from battles on distant worlds, and his armor bore the insignia of the First Terran Liberation Corps. When he spoke, his voice was amplified by external speakers, but it carried the gentle tone of someone addressing frightened children. Colony New Haven, this is Sergeant Oh Minho, Terran Marines. You are safe now. The alien threat has been eliminated. 8,000 people stared at him in silence for a long moment. They had lived underground for so long that many had forgotten what it felt like to stand in the presence of someone who represented safety instead of constant danger. Then Han Yuna, who at 11 years old had spent most of her life hiding in tunnels, walked up to the massive armored figure and touched his metal hand with her small fingers. Are you really human? She asked. The sergeant's helmet retracted, revealing a face that was tired but kind, with the same dark eyes and features as the colonists around him. Yes, little one, I'm human, and I'm here to take you home. That was when the dam broke. 3 years of fear, desperation, and barely contained hope erupted all at once. People cried, laughed, and collapsed to their knees. Parents held their children, while elderly colonists, who had survived the entire siege, wept openly. The sound echoed through the cavern like a release of pressure that had been building for over 1,000 days. More Marines entered the cavern, their heavy boots clicking against the stone floor. They moved with the efficiency of professional soldiers, but their faces showed wonder at what they found. These were not the desperate refugees they had expected to rescue. These were survivors who had maintained their humanity through the worst circumstances imaginable. Dr. Choi Suna found herself face to face with a Terran medical officer, whose equipment looked like something from a science fiction movie compared to the improvised tools she had been using. Doctor, we have full surgical facilities aboard our ships, the medic explained. We can treat injuries that your current equipment cannot handle. How many? She asked, her voice breaking. How many colonies have you found? Yours makes 4, the medic replied. 47 colonies that we have liberated from hegemony control. Every single one of them held out just like you did. Earth remembers all her children. Kim Minji was surrounded by Terran engineers who examined her fusion reactor modifications with something approaching awe. You built a planet killer using agricultural equipment and spare parts, one of them said. This is brilliant work under impossible conditions. We did what we had to do, she replied, though she could not help feeling proud. For 3 years, she had kept 50,000 people alive with nothing but determination and salvaged materials. Park Jinwoo walked slowly through the cavern, watching his people interact with their rescuers. The colonists moved carefully, as if they were afraid the Marines might disappear if they made sudden movements. The children were fascinated by the powered armor and advanced weapons, while the adults asked endless questions about Earth, About the war, about what had happened to the galaxy while they had been trapped underground. Admiral Kim Tae-yoon arrived in the cavern an hour later, flanked by his command staff. He was younger than Jin-woo had expected, maybe 40 years old, but his uniform bore the ribbons of campaigns fought across dozens of star systems. When he approached the colony administrator, his expression was serious but respectful. "Administrator Park, I want to personally apologize for how long it took us to reach you. The Federation fell apart during the early stages of the hegemony invasion. It took us 5 years to build the ships and train the personnel needed to take the fight back to them." Jin-woo studied the Admiral's face, seeing something there that reminded him of his own reflection after 3 years of impossible decisions. What happened to Earth? Earth survived. Barely. The hegemony made the mistake of attacking our home system directly. They learned what humans are capable of when we fight for our families. Admiral Kim's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. The Terran Defense Force was built from the survivors of that battle. Our mission is simple: find every human colony that was abandoned during the invasion and make sure it never happens again, and the hegemony no longer exists as a threat to human space. We made sure of that. The evacuation of New Haven began immediately, but it was not the desperate escape the colonists had sometimes imagined. The Terran ships were equipped with facilities that seemed impossible after 3 years of rationed food and recycled air. Clean water that did not taste of metal filters. Fresh food that had been grown under real sunlight. Medical bays that could heal injuries. The colonists had learned to live with. Han Dojin stood at the observation deck of the transport ship Indomitable, watching New Haven shrink behind them. His sister Yuna stood beside him, her face pressed against the clear aluminum window. For the first time in years, they were traveling towards something instead of hiding from it. "Where are we going?" Yuna asked. "Home," Dojin replied, though he was not entirely sure what that word meant anymore. Admiral Kim appeared beside them at the window. "Actually, you have a choice. Earth is rebuilding and needs people with your experience. Or there are new colonies being established in systems where the hegemony will never threaten them again. The choice is yours." Below them, New Haven continued to turn on its axis, a small blue world that had witnessed something remarkable. 50,000 humans had faced impossible odds and survived through courage, determination, and the simple refusal to give up hope. The transport ship's engines engaged, carrying them toward a future where no human colony would ever stand alone against the dark again.